Scott Morrison will today return from the G7 in France, wrapping up an international summit that was dominated by global tensions over trade, Iran and the Amazon fires. Just before he left, the Prime Minister sat down exclusively and extensively with Sky News, where he called for modern trade rules to apply to China amid its ongoing conflict with Donald Trump. The interview was recorded prior to the arrest of Yang Hengjun. This is Sky News political reporter Tom Connell's full interview with Scott Morrison.
Prime Minister, thanks for your time. You've just met with Boris Johnson, who seems to get along pretty well with Donald Trump. Did you ask for any tips on how to handle the US President?
Well, we all have our relationships with the United States, and I've now met with President Trump on several occasions, and I'm pleased that relationship is, I think, in the strongest position it's been in a long time, and that's been building for many years now. I think we have a good understanding of where they're coming from and what they're trying to achieve, and they're an important partner for us, not just globally, but certainly in the Indo-Pacific region and in the Southwest Pacific, and that's where we've had a lot of our discussions in recent times.
What was your message to Donald Trump in that meeting on his trade war with China?
Well, first of all, just seeking clarity about where they're heading. It's fairly clear that they're seeking to come to a new arrangement with China, and I've always been consistent in saying we'd like to see that happen sooner rather than later, because while this rolls out, I should say, that does have a fairly disruptive impact on confidence in the global economy. And that's why we're all keen to see that resolved sooner rather than later. But you can't just sort of brush it under the carpet. You can't just pretend that all the issues that have led to the tensions in the first place all of a sudden aren't there. So they do have to be resolved. They do have to be acknowledged. They do have to be addressed. Otherwise, it won't, any arrangement won't be enduring. And so we want to see an enduring outcome, and that means to have the issues that are at the centre of this resolved.
And do you feel as though you can be pretty honest with Donald Trump about the impact on markets, on Australia, our own market tumbling again?
Sure, I mean, he's not unaware of these things either, whether in his own country or elsewhere. But equally, we've got ourselves to a point now in the global economy where, after decades of seeing countries like China and others grow and expand, develop, become very sophisticated economies, that the rules that worked for that period won't work so well for the next period. If it's going to be an even playing field. And so it is important this now gets addressed. It is important that we see that we've sort of gone over that tipping point in a new era of the global economy, in which China in particular is an advanced economy, and a developed economy indeed in so many parts of its country.
And so it needs to act more like one, is it not? Playing by the rules?
Well, the rules were different for back then because they were seen as a developing country. I mean, their rules on emissions are completely different to what applies to Australia under the Paris Agreement. Their rules on trade and developing country status was different as well. So we need to move into a new phase. See, we welcome China's growth. We think that's a good thing. Australia has been a big beneficiary from China's growth. But now, having seen that growth, celebrated that growth, it's time for the system to catch up with where they've been able to build their economy to. But not just China. We'll see that in many other countries around the world.
And so when you spoke about emissions, obviously China's agreement is just at some point by the end of this, well, next decade, basically, to then start reducing emissions. You think they should come to an earlier and more concrete commitment?
Well, if emissions don't have nationalities, so an emission from one part of the world has the same impact on the environment as an emission from another. And if it's about actually reducing emissions, then at some point in time, we need to understand that globally.
But this old argument about, well, we've had years of industrialisation, many more decades than China, that doesn't cut it anymore?
Well, is it about the environment or is it about the economy? I mean, emissions, don't negotiate. They have the impact they have, and they all have the same impact. And so I think it's just a matter, I think, of getting some balance into this over time. And Australia's doing its bit. We'll hit our 2020 targets comfortably. There are countries who are at this summit who won't, and we'll exceed it. And we'll hit our 2030 targets as well. So we're doing our bit, but on our own, we don't change the absolute outcome one way or the other. So we'll do our bit. We'll be responsible actors in this space. We'll take action on climate change, but we need to ensure that if we're to avoid the impacts and consequences that people are concerned about, what Australia's concerned about, then we've got to make sure it keeps pace with where the emissions are coming from.
The situation or the issue with Iran, we still support, at least in theory, the nuclear deal that is basically in a bit of a state of disrepair now. The best way to keep it alive, according to a lot of analysts, would be to somehow soften the blow of sanctions on Iran. Would Australia consider helping in any way, in a trade sense, in that regard?
Well, we're not parties to the JCPOA. There are others who are parties to that. I initiated a review of this arrangement after I became Prime Minister, and we concluded that we would maintain the position that we had held. Now, I can't say, though, that this is an agreement and a deal that is wildly successful, but it's the best save for all the others. So, we'll maintain a constancy on this, but we have to be realistic about the threats that this poses, and we want to make sure that we don't end up in the situation where a country like Iran has nuclear weapons.
It seems, though, the more Iran is struggling economically, the more perhaps it will try the other thing and go nuclear. Well, for want of a better term.
That's the view that some put forward, but I think it's important we take all steps to ensure that capability is not realised.
Is one of those steps Australia, I understand not being a part of the agreement, but Australia in any way helping soften the sanctions via trade?
No, we support the sanctions.
So Australia wouldn't consider?
No, we support the sanctions.
Okay. Is it a no-go zone because of Donald Trump's threats over Europe over the same potential issue?
Sorry?
Donald Trump previously having threatened European countries if they perhaps helped Iran bypass those sanctions. Does that make it a no-go for us as well?
No, that's a simple proposition. You need to maintain the sanctions. We maintain the sanctions there. We maintain the sanctions when it comes to North Korea as well. And Australians are involved in enforcing those sanctions. And Australia will continue to do that.
I just want to ask you finally about the Amazon fires, which has been a big discussion here. There could be an agreement at this G7 and already talk of money being provided, including by the UK. Would Australia help out?
Well, I'll be listening carefully to what's put forward, particularly today. I mean, it's very distressing. I mean, it's often been described as the lungs of the world, and they're on fire. There is a very big level of capability, particularly in the Americas and from those who sit around the table at a G7 to be able to addressing this. Australia has a lot of expertise when it comes to fighting fires, as we know, and the season where this is becoming apparent and becoming quite serious is also will be coming into our own season when it comes to fires and likewise. So, we'll carefully consider what requests are made. We're concerned like everybody else is. And we'd look to see what sort of arrangements are put in place. But we also have a lot of our own challenges to deal with within Australia, and if there's the capability to meet the challenges that are there, well, then I would hope that would be the case. But let's just see what requests they make.
From what you've been told and briefed, what do you make of whether some fault lies with the Brazilian government for the current situation?
Oh, look, I don't think it helps to be getting into those sorts of commentaries. It's a matter, I think, to address the environmental hazard that's there now. I don't think these issues are helped by Australia buying into any commentary on this, and I don't intend to.
We've had the French president obviously indicate that there might be some responsibility from the Brazilian government, and hope it puts pressure on them not to do similar actions in the future, not to perhaps increase the number of fires. Is it not worth, if you do think that could be the case, putting Brazil on notice?
I think Australia will always take a very practical view about this. Where there's a problem, where there's a challenge, where there's a need, if we can play a meaningful role, then we'll obviously consider that. But we won't be in the business of running around offering countries lectures.
It's an interesting issue, I guess, because you've got sovereignty, but also the lungs of the world, as you spoke about. There's an onus on Brazil, I guess, to look after it.
Well, I would hope that they would be taking that responsibility seriously, and I'm not about to offer commentary on that one way or the other. I mean, yeah, we all seek to manage things within our own borders. I mean, Australia has its own challenges, and we're very focused on those.